official record.
Professor Behra from Assam University, Silchar has joined.
Oh, wow, wow.
Vijay Kumar Behra.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah. A very good morning to all of you. Indeed, it is a great pleasure for Northeast Sociological Association to be organizing this special second lecture. The virtual medium has enabled all of us from across the globe, and particularly from all corners of the country, to come together in this manner. And first of all, I would like to appreciate, and I also would like to express my gratitude to the office bearers of NEISA, the Northeast Sociological Association. The first special lecture was delivered by eminent sociologist, Professor T.K. Woman. We have the special second lecture today by Professor Satish Deshpande. The official introduction will follow. I just would like to pronounce the order of the program. We will have welcome address by Professor Rajendra Chetri Singh. He is the head of Department Sociology, Manipur University. Then we will follow the introduction of the speaker by Professor M. Amarjit Singh. He is the Honorary Director of Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, Jamia Millia Islamia. Then we will have the lecture by Professor Satish Deshpande. Then we will have the vote of thanks from Professor Rekha M. Sangplyang. She is professor in the Department of Sociology, NEHU. This is the order of the program for today. To begin with, I would like to say a few words that the topic itself, the near future of Indian higher education, perhaps it is because of education that we all are connected in this manner and have come together. And again, it is because of education that all walks of life, be it students, teachers, all across the country and even across the globe, have some common issues to address. So perhaps university and educational institutions are one of the biggest social and public spaces where all categories of people come and interact. Issues emerge in educational institutions. Government of the day comes out with new policy programs and new law. Therefore, there has been a lot of issues on management, administration, and governance. Issues relating to reservation, inclusive and exclusive learning, in terms of jobs, in terms of market goals, social values, all comes from this issue. Particularly, I'm really happy and privileged to have Professor Satish Deshpande, who not only studied from the best institutions of the world. He studied from St. Stephen's, again taught there. He went to the University of California, then came back, taught in the Hyderabad University, joined Economic Institute of Growth. Then he joined Delhi School of Economics in the Department of Sociology. Not only he has gone all the country as well as all countries abroad, he is one practitioner and has been keenly and closely observing on Indian higher education. So with this short perspective, I would like to now give time to Professor Rajendra, who is the head of the Department Sociology in Manipur University, for the welcome address. Professor
Hello,
Ram.
everyone. Yes, thank you, Dr. Kame. Am I audible as well as visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, great. That's great. Yes, hello, everyone. Good morning and Happy New Year to all the esteemed colleagues of Northeast India Sociological Association and all participants of this online lecture. Uh, uh, and not to forget my greetings and warm wishes from Imphal to uh, Professor Satish Deshpande of Delhi School of Economics, Delhi University, who will be delivering this second special lecture as part of continuing special lecture series initiated and organized by NEISA. Uh, Yes, it's really a pleasure. In fact, I will take it as an honor that I have been asked, rather requested, to extend a warm welcome to all the participants, especially to Professor Deshpande. Here, I would like to take a couple of names for particular mention, such as Professor Newmai, Professor R.K. Mohanty, Professor Amarjit, and of course, my friend and a young colleague, Dr. Kame, for as my humble way of saying a big thank you for extending this wonderful academic gesture to me. Uh, Please allow me an iota of liberty to say, rather to reiterate the fact that higher education or the post-secondary education, as it is called in India, is the backbone of any given society. It's the quality of higher education that decides the quality of human resources in any country. At a time when the whole country is putting its best foot forward, trying to improve the quality of higher education in India with the implementation of NEP 2020. And also at a time when India is deliberating whether to go for horizontal or vertical kind of growth of higher education. This today's second lecture on the future of higher Indian education could not have come at a more appropriate time. And in Professor Deshpande, we have an eminent academician who, with his vast knowledge, experience, and expertise in the field of education, will be highlighting with his analytical inputs and insights, of course, about the scenario of the higher education in India. And I'm sure that Professor Deshpande will provide not only food for thought, but a ray of hope for the quality of higher education in the country. Well, friends and colleagues, now is the time of the year, when we all of us are trying to give ourselves warmth, cozy, and pleasant. And winter season is not always a pleasant season, especially for we senior citizens. But I must tell you, friends, in fact, rather, I must confess that I like winter for one simple reason, if not for anything else, because winter portends for all the good things to come. If winter comes, can spring be far behind, as P.V. Shelley so eloquently puts it. Well, friends and colleagues, I think I have taken more time. Rather, I have spoken more than what I should have spoken. And thank you so much for bearing with me. And with these few words, I once again extend my heartfelt welcome to all the participants, especially Professor Deshpande. And so we shall all look forward to his lecture. And now we can't wait to hear it, and we can't wait to listen to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Rajendra, for delivering the welcome address. We now have the introduction from Professor M. Amarjit Singh. He is heading the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. So, Professor Amarjit.
Thank you, Dr. Afun. Before I introduce the speaker, please allow me to briefly introduce the Northeast India Sociological Association. As you know that this association is about a year-old organization, and the broad objective of the Northeast India Sociological Association is to work for the growth and popularization of sociology in general and in Northeast India in particular. So this association also wishes to promote sociological studies of the concern and issues of Northeast India. And as you all know that this association is today affiliated to the Indian Sociological Society. And as you all know that this is, as I have just mentioned, it is just about a year old organization. And we also welcome everyone, I mean, the teachers, researchers, students who are engaged in the study of sociology of Northeast India to be part of this association. So with this brief background, so let me introduce the speaker. Today's speaker need not any introduction, but for the sake of this, the formality, Professor Satish Deshpande is a professor at the Department of Sociology, Delhi School of Economics, Delhi University. And he has MA in Economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University. And also he is also an MA in Sociology as well as PhD in Sociology from University of California. And as Dr. Afun has also mentioned briefly, Professor Deshpande has taught and worked at various renowned institutions such as St. Stephen College, Delhi University. He has also worked at the University of Hyderabad, and he has also worked with the Institute for Economic Growth, Delhi University, and more importantly, he has also worked at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, New Delhi. And you will be happy to know about Professor Satish Pande's research interest, that is caste and class inequalities, contemporary social theory, politics and history of the social sciences, and South-South interactions. And he has authored a number of books and a number of edited volumes. So some of those edited volumes and books are Contemporary India, a Sociological View, Problem of Caste, and another very important book is an edited volume is the Beyond Inclusion, the Practice of equal access in the Indian higher educations. Professor Deshpande was honored with Malcolm Award for distinguished contribution to the development studies for the year 2012 also. And he has articles, a number of book chapters. So many of his research articles has been published in Economic and Political Weekly, then the Human South Asian And he has also very extensively written in newspapers like Hindu, the Indian Express, and 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 he has also been associated with various professional associations like the Indian Sociological Society, and he is also been associated with various reputed journals. So with this, I mean, we are really thankful to Professor Deshpande on behalf of the Northeast India Sociological Association. So we are looking forward to listen to you, sir. And now may I request Dr. Afun to proceed further. Over to you, Dr. Afun.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Amarjit, for the warmly introduction. Of course, there are so many things and, about Professor Deshpande, which one can really talk about. But prior to this meeting, we did have some sort of pre-discussion where we wanted to limit our time so that we can give maximum time to the speaker. As we all know, there are two types of scholars. One is who are known by the institution. A person like me is known to some because I happen to be in Delhi School of Economics. And there are also scholars where institutions are known by them. Professor Deshpande is one of them, where I have experience, I have witnessed, especially during the intake of PhD admissions. Out of 140 students where we have shortlisted, more than 50% or more than 60%, would like to work with Professor Deshpande. And more so, he also has two faces. In a sense, in the department, he remains very humble, kind, soft-hearted. But the real face is really emerged as a very courageous, very brave person when he writes on crucial and critical issues of Indian society. As I was participating in some of the refresher courses, I was astonished that many eminent sociologists who came to deliver in many of the courses would name Professor Deshpande as the only Indian sociologist who can be credited to quantitative, working, as specialist, and many others when it comes to the study of caste and class. Definitely Professor Deshpande's name is again at the top. Likewise, on Indian higher education, his name is always visible as the top scholar who writes well and at the same time who brings all perspectives together. Perhaps in my 12 years, going to be 13 years of my association in the department, I see him as the only person equally good in writing as well as in speaking. He is one person that whatever he speaks, the same kind of words is used in his writing as well. So I'm really happy to welcome Professor Deshpande. And once again, on behalf of Northeast India Sociological Association, we warmly welcome you, sir, and kindly take the time. We have around 40 to 45 minutes, and after that, it will be open for discussion. The discussion time we have slotted is around 20 minutes. So whoever would like to take the opportunity to ask questions may make it short. So over to Professor Deshpande. Please take your time, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm a little overwhelmed by this elaborate introduction, and as they say, and this I'm addressing this to the rest of the audience, you should not believe everything you hear. So wait to find out. And I'm now afraid that after such an introduction, my lecture is definitely very likely to not live up to those expectations. But let me try my best. I begin by thanking Professor Rajendra, Professor Amarjeet, Dr. Afun, and of course, NEISA for this honor and this privilege. I am very, when it comes to the Northeast, I've been there a few times. I am made aware of how little I know about this country of ours. And I have, ever since I got to know a little bit about it, I always believed that the Northeast was, in fact, like a continent, that we should treat it like a continent. It is so complicated and so very intriguing. So the topic that I've chosen to speak on, and which I was also asked to speak on, is the near future. I've titled it as the near future of Indian higher education, which means the next 10 or 15 years. Titles like the future of Indian higher education or the future of anything have the risk of being very expansive. And that's why I put in the word near to make sure that we're only talking about the immediate future. So what I'm going to be saying is going to be, relatively speaking, very general. As you know, in academics, specialists, when we begin to specialize in a particular area, we essentially start to know more and more about less and less as you narrow your field. I deliberately want to keep the lecture very broad so that it can connect with more people. But I will welcome specific questions. There are many aspects, obviously, which cannot be developed in this lecture, many issues, but I will be very happy to take this up in the discussion time. So let me begin, since we are in the age of technology, as Dr. Hoffman has reminded us. Let me take advantage of it and share with you a PowerPoint I have prepared for this. And I hope it will help you to Is it visible to everyone?
Yes, it is. If you can
Oh.
kindly enlarge
Yes.
your slides, that would be awesome.
Sorry?
If you can kindly enlarge your slide, that would be awesome.
Yes, this is actually a full screen slide. I'm sharing
Right.
my entire screen. I have two screens.
All right.
I'm sharing the entire screen on which this PowerPoint is appearing. I'm not sure whether at your end, at the host end, if something can be done to pin the presentation so that then it,
Yeah, we'll take care of that. Please go ahead. Thank you.
because at my end, it is the entire screen. So should I proceed?
Yes, please.
Okay. So my lecture is divided into 4 parts, one of which is very tentative and will seek your help and your guidance. The first part is about, when we talk about the future of something, we have to start by talking about what that something is for, and therefore what the prospects, what the future of those users of that thing face. Then I'm going to be talking a little bit about the recent history of Indian higher education, to ask whether our recent history, which has actually been a very eventful history in higher education, whether it helps us to think about the future. Then I'm going to put together some speculations about both the global and the local futures of higher education. Most of these speculations are those of others. Some of them are mine, and I'm sure some of you will also have some ideas about where this the higher education might be going. And part D is something that I have specially worked on for this presentation, where I'm trying to begin from my very, very limited knowledge of the Northeast. I'm trying to begin to think about what it might mean to analyze the situation of higher education in a context like the Northeast. But as I said, this is the section where I will seek your help and so on, because obviously each one of you knows far more about the Northeast than I do. So let's go through these 4 parts, and I will try and keep things, keep to the time limit. So the first part of this, the social functions of higher education and the future of those functions. So traditionally, we have thought about higher education from a social perspective and also an individual perspective. From the social perspective, the traditional function of higher education, as different from education in general, is supposed to be both disseminating existing knowledge, but also importantly, producing new knowledge. And the broadest way of putting this is to say that higher education is meant to prepare societies for the future. And that is what new knowledge is also meant to be about. And in the very act of producing new knowledge, some part of the future is also being shaped. So a field like higher education not only serves to prepare society for the future, it also builds the future directly itself by shaping some of it. Aside from that, the more conventional economic, particularly justification for higher education has been that it produces a more skilled and productive workforce, and that therefore this leads to a more sophisticated economy, an economy that is able to grow faster, is able to be more flexible, and so on. And in the context of all the talk about a knowledge society and so on, this is seen as something straightforwardly required of and expected of higher education. Now, from an individual perspective, higher education is seen as a route to social mobility and advancement. It's very common for this function to be attributed to higher education. And there is also a less specific, more broad. It's broader than we think. The desire for learning for its own sake. We often, particularly scholars, and particularly those who have any sort of background in economics like myself, tend to discount these kinds of things. But in fact, in society, a much larger number of people than one might imagine actually want to learn for the sake of learning, if it is possible for them. But there is not very much that can be said in the context of the present talk on this particular motive. So I'm setting this aside for a future discussion. Most of what I'm going to be saying is going to be about the first 3. In fact, almost all of what I'm going to say. So if we take these functions of higher education one by one and try to look at what are their prospects. If we look at the production of new knowledge, today it is a fact that the production of new knowledge is almost completely monopolized, is restricted to not just the West and aggressively developing in the science field countries like China, but it is restricted to a small segment of these places also. So even the Western Academy, only a small part of the Western Academy is actually engaged in the production of new knowledge. China has made incredible progress in this. And it's not, it's interesting to compare this. I don't think any other country can compare with the kind of progress that China has made in the last 2 or 3 decades, except perhaps the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, but that is a special case. We'll come to that. So most places like India, including Indian elite institutions, don't really, in a realistic sense, in my opinion, participate in the production of new knowledge. If we are talking about it in a global sense. And unfortunately, this is true even far beyond the science and technology fields, where, of course, this is true. Many will recognize that it is true, but it is also true of the social sciences and humanities, including specifically, since we are a sociological association, I must say that it is also true of disciplines like sociology. And this is not because this is for, how shall I put it? This is for institutional reasons. It's not because, forgive me, I have this cough that keeps. It is not because Westerners are more intelligent than us, or the Chinese are more intelligent than us, or reasons like that, but for institutional reasons. They have the resources and they have the institutional arrangements that allow them to be at the forefront. And today, being at the forefront of knowledge production is a very expensive business, and it is a very club-like thing. It's a very close-knit set of relatively very few institutions across the world that are doing this. So most places, most institutions of higher education in most of the world are not really participating in the production of new knowledge. At best, they are participating in the dissemination of whatever knowledge is produced in the lead sectors. There is also the, I'm not going to go into too much, in the science and technology field, there is also the issue of the domination of corporate interests. Um, Companies are now very directly involved in frontline research, and there is a lot of collaboration between universities and elite universities in the West and private capital. When it comes to the question of creating a more skilled labor force and so on, this whole rationale has lost its moorings, it's lost its anchoring. Earlier in mainstream development economics, increasing the level of education of the workforce was seen as an obvious route to higher rates of growth. Today, the place of labor in the current contemporary economy has changed decisively. Um, what is called the financialization of the global economy has meant that there is a way in which capital accumulation, or the creation of profits more simply, can proceed without really having to create many jobs. So the earlier vision that growth must bring increasing levels of employment is today no longer true. So what was once considered to be an automatic and taken for granted link between higher education and employment, that link is almost broken today. It's not fully broken, but it is really in bad state. Plus, today, if we speak in terms of the expectation of social mobility, then higher education can no longer guarantee a decent job. In fact, we are in a situation where precarity, this jobs being precarious, and the precariat today extends to highly skilled workers as well. So just because you have a higher educational degree does not mean that you will get a good job. So this particular motivation has also suffered a major blow. And we are, for a while, there was talk of jobless growth, that is to say, growth without creating more jobs, simply maintaining current levels of employment. Today, we have an actual shrinking of employment levels in the long term, not just because of immediate recessions and so on. There are some ups and downs in the labor market, and there are frequently claims are made that it's climbing back to normal levels, but it has this up and down movement has moved to a lower level. So what this does is that it really intensifies competition within possessors of higher education credentials for jobs, and therefore it leads to what is called credential inflation, where people collect extra degrees just to not because they really need them or they will be used, but because they will make them a better candidate in the competition for scarce jobs. And what is perhaps most worrying, and this is a global fact, not just in India, what is called the massification of higher education, the massive increase in enrollment that has happened across the globe in the last 20 years. The expectations that were there, that were associated with higher education, that making higher education more accessible would lead, again, almost automatically, it was believed, to a reduction of inequality. Those expectations are today no longer credible. So, in a very perverse and contradictory way, the very increase of access, the very broadening of access, the fact that many more people now access higher education, has in fact deepened or highlighted, made more prominent the role of non-merit factors like social capital, who you know, what are your contacts, what is your caste or kin group, and so on. And of course, economic capital, how much economic capital you can bring to bear. So an educational qualification has become more like just a necessary condition, very far from a sufficient condition for getting a decent job. And therefore, all the hope associated with the broadening of access to higher education has been, and it's particularly for social justice, from a social justice point of view, has had to be revised because new informal barriers to full inclusion, despite the formal access, full inclusion in the life of institutions is still not available for many. I move now to the recent history of Indian higher education and ask whether this history allows us to guess what the future will hold for us. So, to start with the issue of massive expansion, this expansion has been really breathtaking. Both China and India have seen rates of growth of higher education access never seen before in the history of the human race. And more first generation entrants into higher education are there, have managed to gain access in the last 20 years in China and India than ever before in human history, anywhere. Globally, UNESCO estimates that enrollment has increased by 2.5 times. But in our case, in India, the expansion, India and China, in India, the expansion has been much larger. So our expansion in enrollment has been 4.5 times in the 21st century. That is from 2000 to 2020. Our enrollment has increased by 4.5 times. Our gross enrollment ratio, that is the proportion of people in the college-going age group who are actually enrolled, has over this period more than tripled. So there are now 38.5 million roughly persons enrolled in Indian higher education. And if you were to treat this population like a country, it would have a population larger than the population of Canada, and it would be ranked 38th in the world. So there has been massive expansion. Along with this massive expansion, in fact, driving this expansion has been the privatization of higher education. Ever since higher education in the modern form, modern Western form, came to India in 1859, right from there until the 21st century, until the 2000s, the majority of institutions, in fact, until very recently, 90% of the institutions of higher education were public institutions. In the last 30, 35 years, change has started, but it started in the technical fields in the 1970s. And in the 21st century, this has accelerated a lot. Today, 4/5, that is to say, nearly 80% of all higher education institutions are private institutions. And they account for almost 2/3 of the enrollment in higher education. So this is a very big change from being a primarily public institution dominated field. Higher education in India has become now a private institution dominated field, at least in terms of the numbers. But elite public institutions are still desired, but that situation may be changing, as we'll see a little bit later. A very big change and very important change, and on the whole, a very positive change, has been the change in the social composition. So higher education in India until the 1990s was incredibly homogeneous in the sense that it was dominated by upper castes and the middle classes. Both overlapped a lot up to the 1990s. After that, partly because of reservation, but partly also because of economic prosperity, there has been a very substantial increase in the presence of hitherto excluded castes and classes in Indian higher education. A notable story here is gender parity. In many disciplines, excluding the scientific technical disciplines, professional and many professional fields, women are in fact in a small majority in most fields in higher education today. And the overall gender parity ratio has come down. The proportion of women has come to close to 49%. So very close to parity. But there are still groups that remain underrepresented, like Muslims and persons with disability remain significantly underrepresented relative to their share of population. But on the whole, the change in social composition has been very, very positive. Let us now talk about more recent things like the National Education Policy of 2020 and the changes that it has brought about. A lot has already been written about the NEP, so I don't want to say too much. Let me mention some of its positive and negative features. For me, the biggest negative of the NEP as it stands is that it does not come with a firm financial commitment from the government. As we know, there is a long-standing complaint about the state's role in education in general and in higher education in particular has been that spending on education in India does not match the levels of spending in even middle-income countries. And that trend continues with the NEP, where there is no clear commitment on the part of the government to devoting resources to this field, even though a new vision document has been prepared to change the direction to be taken by Indian higher education. Another problem with the NEP is that it has borrowed from global trends and global paradigms of reform in higher education without sufficient customization for Indian conditions. So while on the whole this is not a bad thing, customization is extremely important. to ensure that policies and frameworks that are good for a very different context are altered sufficiently so that they suit our very different context. Much of the language that is being used in higher education reform in multilateral agencies derives from the from Western Europe, from the OECD countries, and from the Bologna process that started 1999. The OECD in particular has been very active in this, and the NEP shows many signs of taking directly from the Incheon Declaration. The lack of customization is what is a cause of concern. And one example of this, the mismatch that this causes, is the emphasis on the four-year undergraduate degree, which in Indian conditions, to my mind, simply does not make sense. In particular, the multiple entry and exit points do not make sense in a country like India, where there is no advantage to leaving university with a one-year certificate or a two-year diploma or whatever the phase is, where we are a low-wage, job-scarce country. And here there's no question that somebody leaving after a one-year certificate will be able to earn enough to come back to the university later. While this might make sense for at the postgraduate level, it doesn't make sense at the undergraduate level. And why is this happening? This is happening because this format is favored in other contexts where there are reasons for it to work, but those reasons don't operate in our context. Another major shortcoming to my mind is lack of explicit attention to questions of equity, in the sense that the reference to disadvantaged groups is sounds more like a euphemism, and NEP does not seem to wish to tackle head-on the very important and real problems of unequal access and including discrimination in higher education, systemic discrimination. All this said and done, the NEP nevertheless has some positive features. The two main ones, to my mind, are its very strong emphasis on a holistic and multidisciplinary education. This is, I think, excellent, and as a corrective to the over-specialization that has happened in Indian higher education, and the turn towards integrated universities rather than standalone single discipline institutions is a very good move. And also the move to consolidate institutions into viable sizes. The vast majority, as it points out, NEB points out, the vast majority of our institutions are suboptimal in terms of their size. So these are some features of the official recent history. Broadly speaking, I want to mention, leave it at that. Mention the fact that in another 10 years, since this is about the near future, in another 10 to 12 years, we will be passing out of the demographic bulge. That is to say, the college-going age group will begin to decline in another 8 to 12 years. So far, it has been increasing because of the demographic bulge and what was hoped to be a demographic dividend. But unfortunately, precisely the time when the share of the working age population was the most, and even the higher education and eligible population was the most, our job situation has been the opposite. Jobs have been contracting when job seekers have been growing more numerous. So this will have to be taken account of very soon. There is also now, because of the sustained neglect and various other factors, elite flight is happening from higher education, public higher education, and the emergence of private institutions. Everybody knows about that. We can talk about it a little bit more. So I want to now quickly go on to some speculations that are being made about what the future might hold. Um, what has already been noticed by many is that the pandemic brought an contingent event, an unexpected accidental event like the pandemic has brought on changes insofar as it has entrenched the position of online methods, online education as a possible way to expand and to organize higher education. And state and market are now moving in the same direction of emphasizing online education. And this is because it has overwhelming advantages from an administrator's point of view, or an entrepreneur, an educational entrepreneur's point of view. It has immense scalability at very low cost, and it ensures the possibility of detailed centralized administrative control of content and of the management of higher education. So, because of these very strong advantages, the advance of online education will be very hard to counter. Online education can be a very good supplement and an addition to face-to-face education. But we also need to ask whether for certain groups and in certain contexts, it might actually be beneficial. And particularly in the Northeast, I'll come to that in the end. So the future seems to be, future looks like it is going to be more online than our present, significantly more online than our present. And who will gain and who will lose from this change is what we need to think about. There are some very provocative claims made by market watchers, as they are called, pundits who are supposed to know about the market in the West, who are saying that, and one prominent person is Scott Galloway, one of the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who's now teaching management in NYU. He says that the future is going to see some mega tie-ups between large global platforms like Amazon and Facebook and so on, and the big brand names in global education like MIT or Oxford or Harvard and so on. So that education is going to be packaged as part in person and part online, and the market can be expanded this way. And this will leave, and because of the possibilities of expansion in this way, this will have major consequences for the global higher education sector. And his predictions are that the top 200 global institutions will probably do all right, but the future is extremely uncertain for everybody else. So that means for us in India, that means our future, if this is going to happen, we'll have to really think about what the consequences of such developments might be for us. Do we now need to think, if the employment higher education link has been broken, do we need to think in terms of creative self-employment possibilities? This is also being encouraged by our Prime Minister in terms of that we should become entrepreneurs, job givers rather than job takers. But this is, as we all know, this is more easily said than done. But in terms of a model, this points to what people like Kalyan Sanyal, the late economist Kalyan Sanyal, had talked about in terms of a needs economy. That is to say, a new economy a parallel economy is being brought into being by the operations of contemporary capitalism, which is throwing out or expelling a large number of people as surplus population. They are not required. They are not required as workers. They are not required as consumers. So they are simply surplus to requirements. And capital is not interested in them in any way, except if they are sitting on resources that are wanted by corporate capital, in which case they must be displaced from there. But nevertheless, there are these needs economies which are about survival. They are not like conventional firms. They are about managing to survive by usually through some form of service provision of an informal kind, and which emphasize various kinds of affective networks like kinship relations, or other types of relationships in order to ensure the survival of the group. So will we see something like this rather than the conventional pattern of employment? Well, some of this is already happening. Will Indian higher education become a major outsourcing center for global higher education? So we are already providing raw materials for research. That is to say, we are providing data, research sites, and so on. And we are also providing well-trained, at least our elite sector is providing well-trained research scholars, ready-made sort of research students for the Western academy. Large proportion of our most successful students tend to go abroad and do very well in elite institutions abroad. But the role for Indian higher education, therefore, is as a supplier of such talent, which will then become NRIs, basically, and also other forms of collaboration. Many Western universities have set up centers in India, and now there is the proposal to bring foreign universities as full-fledged business ventures, who will be allowed to repatriate full profits, etc. So you must all have read about that. We can talk a little bit more about it as we go along. But this broad option of being a junior partner in or an ancillary supplier, like automobile manufacturers have, somebody makes the brake linings, somebody makes the steering wheel, so we'll be making some sort of part in, by that analogy, in the larger global machine of higher education. What is perhaps going to be almost impossible to avoid is a further deepening of the inequalities already present in Indian higher education, and caused by the uneven terrain of Indian higher education. Massification brought with it very wide variation in quality, as we know, and it also led to the deployment of different kinds of techniques, different kinds of methods by the old elite, the established elite, to retain their hold over the best institutions, the high quality institutions, and to allow only access to the low quality institutions for the new entrants. Even within elite institutions, where by law the entry of hitherto excluded groups was mandated, essentially reservation, even there, more and more sophisticated, invisible forms of informal glass ceilings, so to speak, are being erected to prevent full participation of students. These forms are very hard to study because they are not explicit, they are not necessarily always spoken about, but they exist. And again, this is not only an Indian feature; it is found in other situations other situations as well. The broad picture that looks that seems most likely is, I'm sorry to say, not a very happy picture. I feel that, broadly speaking, what happened to school education in the 1970s will probably happen to public higher education in the 2020s. What do I mean by that? I mean that in the decade of the 1970s was a decisive decade when the middle classes and the elite abandoned public schooling and went en masse to private schooling. And this led, once the elite left the government school quality began to decline, and for various other reasons, because government school teachers are one of the largest groups of employees, therefore liable to politicization and so on. For various other reasons as well, government schools, which until if I am actually the generation that made the, I mean, we were all very small then, we didn't realize this was happening, but my generation really embodies that, because my father, under a lot of peer pressure, moved us from my brother and I was admitted from the beginning in a private school. Otherwise, in my father's time, government schools were the best schools, and there was absolutely no hesitation at all in sending children to government schools. Today, as we all know, only those who are parents who have no option send their children to the ordinary government school. I'm not talking about elite government schools. There's an elite sector even within the government schools, but that's this. So we have the situation today where school education is heavily privatized. Interesting things have happened because of the pandemic. I don't know, many of you may be aware of the recent NEISA report and also press reports that say that many private schools have shut down during the pandemic, and the enrollment in government schools has increased. So I don't know if this will be a long-term trend. This is certainly a new and development contrary to the trend that was true until then. But broadly speaking, it looks like, especially with the announcement of this foreign universities thing, where foreign universities have complete control over their curriculum, their fee structure, their admission process, and so on, and exactly the opposite for public institutions. Their fee structure, their curriculum, their all sorts of rules and regulations are applied to public education, where public higher education, while freedom is being promised for the foreign sector that will come in, including the freedom to repatriate full profits. So this points to a situation where maybe 10 to 12 years in the future, that is the near future I'm talking about, what today we take for granted about school education will become true of higher education as well. That any parent with a choice will be forced to send their children for higher education to a private institution rather than a public one. This has not happened yet. Our elite public institutions are still in high demand, and we have to see how things work out. But I must say that from where I stand, the weight of events is tilted in this direction. So this is what the speculations about the future of higher education look like. I want to turn now to the section where I speak now as a apprentice, as a learner, rather than as an expert or somebody who knows. So I want to start thinking. I want to think about what it means to try and analyze higher education in the Northeast. What sort of a vantage point or what standpoint do we need, or what are the dimensions or aspects or features of the standpoint that is required to look at higher education in the Northeast. I will look to all of you for your thoughts on this as well. But let me tell you very briefly what my very initial and very beginner-like thoughts on this have been. First of all, there is, I think, there are the logical issues. That is to say, issues arising from demography. How do you think of higher education in smaller societies? Or rather, the country as a whole, India as a whole is the exception because we are such a huge population. Most countries in the world are much smaller. So we are used to thinking in terms of large numbers. But how do you think about higher education when the numbers are very small and spatial factors are involved, like dispersion of populations? So this is a logical issue, really. This would be true for any region that has the same characteristics as the Northeast. But in addition to this, we have the question of identities, which are very important because identities have also taken shape or also formed states, and that becomes important as well. There are ethnic identities, tribal identities. I must also add, of course, given what has been happening recently, religious identities are also extremely important in this region. Not that they are unimportant elsewhere in the country, but here they seem to be central in a different way. So how do we think about higher education in a place like this? Another point that seemed to me would be essential for this vantage point is that would shape this vantage point is the question of the tension between local and outside state or outside region higher education. While this may seem analogous to the question of our students going abroad, global education versus higher education in India, I think there may be important differences here that we need to think about. That is to say, India and the West versus mainland India versus the Northeast. I don't know if these two pairs are strictly comparable, involve the same sorts of considerations. And these sorts of issues tend to be, by their very nature, very complex because it's not a simple question of preferring one or the other. And there are all sorts of things tied up to each of these choices. Attached to this is something that is part of the logical structure. Attached to this is the question of the employment market, the labor market in the Northeast. Who are the principal employers? What are the principal kinds of jobs? And what is the relationship of higher education to the available spread of jobs? We have to also factor in the fact that the center, the Indian state, plays a larger than life role here in this part of the world. And as we will see, I just started putting together some numbers, plays a larger than life role here, which has its pluses and its, I'm sure, its minuses. So let's take a look at some numbers very quickly. I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with this, but these were the latest ones that I could pick out, and perhaps they will serve as a to begin a discussion. If you look at this table, one thing is immediately clear, that the Northeast is well endowed in terms of central institutions. If you look at the first two columns, which are for central universities and institutions of national importance, you will see that every single state in the Northeast is represented, and that in terms of proportion as well, particularly for central universities, the Northeast does pretty well. We also notice the state private university column has very few blanks. So clearly state private universities are coming up. Other than that, there are the obvious size differentials with Assam having obviously having far more institutions than the other states. But it is interesting, this table is nevertheless interesting, at least to someone like me, a newcomer to this field like me, to see the representation of central institutions in this region. So this is something to be factored in. It might not necessarily only be a positive. There might be negatives associated with this, which I'm simply speculating. We need to think about this. So this is in terms of the availability of institutions. By the way, all of this data is from the All India Survey of Higher Education, its latest final report, which is from 2019-20. I also wanted to look at availability of institutions in relation to population, and this is what ISHE also does, the All India Survey also does. And once again, if you look at the middle column, colleges per lakh population, if you leave out Tripura and Assam, the remaining states are, in comparison to the national average, doing pretty well. And Manipur, in fact, is above the national average. So there are 31 colleges per 1 lakh population in Manipur, whereas the national average is only 30. And two states, Mizoram and Nagaland, have 28 colleges. Meghalaya seems to be a little bit less. This is one of the things here is that this might be, this is about proportions. So this might be because of large populations. So for example, Assam, the number 15 for Assam is somewhat misleading, because this is due to the very large population of Assam. So even though Assam has by far a huge number of colleges, it also has a huge population. So therefore, the average comes down. If you look at the average enrollment per college also, I was pleasantly surprised to find these numbers. I thought they would be very low, much lower than this, but actually they are not. So the density of enrollment is also pretty good. So this is interesting to know, useful to know as a starting point for thinking about higher education. I should have mentioned this earlier. Actually, let me go back to the old. One of the vantage point issues that I wanted to mention, which I should have mentioned before I got into the details of the tables, is that tribal identity is extremely important for the Northeast. And as we know in our country, tribal identity, like every identity, tribal identity is complex. And that is why I thought that comparing the Northeast to states like Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand, which are also considered to be tribal states, would be useful. And that part of things also I need to talk about. So I'm going back now to the previous table. If you look at Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand in relation to the Northeast, you will see that, if anything, Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand are not doing as well, if we speak in terms of overall terms, or at least there's not. If anything, the difference is in favor of the Northeast. Here, you can immediately see that Jharkhand in particular, in terms of college density, is way behind the Northeast. There are only 8 colleges per lakh population. Chhattisgarh is in the same sort of range as most of the Northeast. In Jharkhand, this is despite the average enrollment being so very high. So this was also interesting. So I've kept Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand as a kind of comparison for this reason. And now the final table, which is probably the most that macro data can tell us. This is the gross enrollment ratio in higher education. Gross enrollment ratio is basically the population in the 18 to 23 years as the denominator, and the numbers within this age group who are actually enrolled at the time of the survey as the numerator. So this ratio is restricted to the college-going population, which is globally it is assumed to be 18 to 23. So as we can see here, if we look at the green part, the GERs for tend to vary a lot for males, but as expectedly are very much better in the Northeast for females. This is without regard to any other division. This is the entire population. If we come to scheduled tribes, the official category of scheduled tribes, we see some very strong differences. Again, these are, I think, broadly expected. You would expect these differences, particularly for the females. And you see some variation within the Northeast, but not that much. But the contrast with Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand is quite substantial, with the exception of Tripura, which is more like Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand than it is like the Northeast. Sikkim is also an outlier here, but Sikkim I'm never sure whether to include it in the Northeast or not, and that's it. So this is my very, very preliminary attempt to start thinking about higher education in the Northeast. If the future of higher education in India as a whole and the globe as a whole is what we have been talking about for the rest of the talk, in this concluding part, just as a small sort of beginning, I thought that I would speculate on this and invite your, I'm sure many of you have a much more evolved thoughts, much more developed ideas about higher education in the Northeast. Unfortunately, on the whole, the future of higher education, in my opinion, does not look very bright. And there are, I have tried to discuss the reasons for that. As we all know, predicting the future is a very risky business, and most social scientific work is retrospective. We very wisely wait until something has fully happened and then do a post-mortem where we can be sure of what has happened and what has not. So speculating about the future is risky business, and I hope and pray that I'm proved wrong. But from where I stand, the global prospect and the Indian prospect, particularly for public higher education, is not very cheerful. And as for the Northeast itself, I wait for you to tell me more about that. I'll stop here by thanking once again NEISA and everyone for giving me this opportunity and doing me this honor by asking me to address you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Satish Deshpande. I take this privilege to make a small summary before I open to the House for discussion. I could see in the chat box 2 questions are put already. So may I request Professor Deshpande also to kindly look at the questions, and as we look forward to receive more questions, I would like to summarize in this way that the lecture, the presentation has been very carefully done and very, very comprehensive. And in fact, the topic itself is a concern to all of us. I think the speaker has somehow produced a very strong base a good ground and structure to see things very, very carefully. And the construction of the methodology is to look at how historical framework, historical background gives to understand the present day situation, and also to speculate some of the few things which are coming in the near future. I would like to once again thank Professor Deshpande for the outstanding and very, very intensive presentation on Indian higher education. The contextualization on the Northeast, I think is very, very beneficial. Though many of us are born and brought up in the region, I think the objective analysis through the use of statistics and data somehow gives us another perspective, not only as an insider, but also what data really talks about. I would say that the presentation is a combination of two specialists, one in terms of how big data can also be used in a discipline like sociology, and on the other, how comparative method can be employed while studying different regions of the country. So once again, on behalf of the Northeast India Sociological Association, huge appreciation to Professor Deshpande for honoring and also delivering this beautiful second special lecture. With this, I would like to request Professor Deshpande to start responding to the questions. And I also would like to give the privilege in case if Professor Amarjit would like to speak, or otherwise, if he is fine with the message, that also will be taken. But perhaps speaking definitely will make us more alive. And that's how I also would like to go to the second question from Professor Ajay. If you could kindly use the mic, I think that would be a good idea. So we have several more questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Afun. It was a very interesting talk by Professor Deshpande sir. And my question to you, recently we saw in the newspaper in which the education minister have stated that the tribals will be the major beneficiary of the national education policy. Uh, so, so in the light of that, this newspaper report. So, what do you think? How do you? Yeah.
Yes. The question of mother tongue in higher education has a very different place than the question of mother tongue in school education.
I see.
So we have to think carefully about its role in higher education. Because on the one hand, in higher education, you have to go with the language in which the materials are available, whatever that language is in your context. And in the Indian context, mostly it is available in English. That is why there is a lot of popular demand for English at the school level, so that when they come up to the higher education level, students are able to take advantage of that material. There is a very strong argument to be made for school teaching in the mother tongue. But unfortunately, this is not something that is a matter of 1 year, 2 years, or even a decade. This is something because there is a circularity involved. The resources of a language have to be developed at the same time as you're using that language to teach. So the work of developing the language is a long-term work that has to be done by a large community of people. So which has been lacking in all our languages. And I don't think the tribal languages are any worse off than most of our other languages, maybe marginally, but not really significantly. So how will that work happen? That work will happen only through deliberate effort, because the existing market and the existing forces don't incentivize us. In fact, they have the opposite incentive. There is all the incentive to study English, and no incentive at all to study your own languages. So this is the difficult dilemma in which the question of language is trapped, particularly in higher education. Matters are a little bit more straightforward in school education, because it is not a matter of pursuing the latest knowledge, or the school education can be more manageable in terms of handling it in different languages. But the point is that education at the school level in mother tongue increases the agency, the empowerment of the student vis-a-vis educational institutions, which is very, very important. But I believe in higher education, it may have a limited role, a role for which a lot of prior work is needed before it is ready to fulfill that role. So that's my answer.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Professor Ajayu has a question. Yes.
Okay. Just would like to know your opinion on this fact that some of the central universities have been asking their respective faculty to launch interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary online courses with 4 credits or 2 credits and charge fees to generate revenue for their respective departments and centers. And students from across the globe can, pay the fees and then join such courses, and they will get the certificate. They will also get the credit back to their respective parent universities in whichever country they hail from. And we have been debating that such revenue will be used as maintenance grant, because our budgets are now cut down by the government. We cannot even have PhD viva in a physical mode with external experts in many universities, because we don't have maintenance grant. So I would like to know your take on this, offering optional courses, multidisciplinary courses.
Yes. Thank you very much for this question. Yes, this is happening a lot, and those of us who are in relatively well-endowed institutions like Delhi University are somewhat protected from this. But right next to us, it's happening all the time. This is the IGNOU model, in the sense that distance education model. The issues involved, partly what you're saying, will this be used to cut the maintenance grant? Yes, that is one issue. The other issue is also of managing such courses, because I am not against fees being charged. I believe that public higher education is severely underpriced, and we can increase, or we can have a system of paying of fees according to ability, rather than the system that we have now, where it is basically nothing. I paid, I think, 19 rupees or something like that for my undergrad during my undergraduate days. Now today, that sort of thing is ridiculous. So we should be both taking care of students who cannot genuinely afford things, but also charging more where it is possible to charge more. But this kind of thing, the self-financing move, is a whole different animal. And in many regional universities, it has got completely out of control, where the tail starts wagging the dog. What is initially comes as an addendum begins to actually dominate things. This is the way in which private institutions are set up. They are essentially about encashing the demand for particular types of degrees. So I don't think this is a very healthy direction for public institutions to take. I think it requires if it is to be done at all, it has to be done in a very controlled manner with careful thinking.
Okay. Yes. Professor Vijay Lakshmi Brara. Yeah. Please take your time. Hello.
Vijayalakshmi, you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Ajalu. Uh,
Yeah.
so I'm Vijay Lakshmi. I'm teaching in Royal Global University in Guwahati, and I have been teaching in Manipur University for 12 years. And my two questions to you is that you talked about this very impressive growth of infrastructure in and educational institutions in the Northeast India, and particularly Manipur. But there is a continuous stream of out migration of students to other parts of India. Why do you think it is happening, in spite of the central institutions in within the region? Number two point is that I have been teaching various subjects in sociology, particularly sociology of Northeast India. Now, the students, when I interact with them, you talked about the language in higher education of the local language, but when you listen to the ideas in their own language, or in tutti putti Hindi, the ideas are so beautiful and so unique. Translation into English is becomes a real problem, and so this is a real bottleneck in higher education now. So I don't know how to tackle with it. Number three point is that this whole the thing called Northeast, it is not really homogeneous. The thing called tribals, again, it is not really homogeneous, as you yourself pointed out. That Chhattisgarh, you compare the Chhattisgarh area and Northeast tribal area, the marked differences between but within that Northeast also, the heterogeneity among the tribals and within the tribes themselves, in the sense there are tangents whereby the elites, the growth of elites among the tribes and the growth of elites among other very communities, they are moving in a very different direction, as probably happening in all over the world. And but particularly noticed in Northeast, because when we see those as part of the statistics, there's majority of it which is not happening. They're there. So in fact, for example, in the district in Arunachal, it's called Anjaw district, there is no internet, there is no communication, newspaper doesn't reach. So in that context, there is complete what you say, the concept of binary, periphery and mainland. But there are so many areas in Northeast where this binary is broken. It is obsolete. This binary has become an obsolete in today's world. So these 3 4 questions are worrying point for me, sir, if you can give your reaction to it.
Thank you. These are very large questions you have raised, so I'm only going to give partial sort of responses. The motivations for outmigration are not so mysterious, right? I mean, you think that you might have better prospects if you go elsewhere. This part of things is in fact analogical to students from, let's say, Delhi or Hyderabad or Mumbai or any of these big cities going abroad. Why do they go abroad and not pursue? Because they may feel that their prospects might be better. For this, we need our institutions to become more attractive, become more compelling. So sometimes when it works, and it is possible to do that. I have had in both in the University of Hyderabad as well as in the University of Delhi. I've had many students deciding to stay back, even though they were able to go. So it can be done. It can be done if you make our institutions attractive. Now that is a very vague term. Basically, we have to create an institutions are very for sociologists, institutions are very mysterious things. We only know when they work, when they don't work, we try to find out why. But why an institution starts to work, we are never clear. It's much easier to explain why institutions break down than what makes institutions work very well. So if we make our institutions attractive, I think that will also help. I think the language question, I am very interested in the language question. So I also work on the language question. So I would reiterate what I'm saying. I get so many. I work also in Hindi academically, and I get a lot of students in Hindi who feel that the only reason they are being held back is because of not knowing English. But often they have received no training in thinking, in making an argument. And what they do in their own language is very eloquent in linguistic terms, very nice. But in terms of an argument, it is often lacking. And it's very easy to, in any language, it is very easy to mistake um, uh, good writing for good argument. So I would stress that work on developing languages has to be done first as a priority before we begin to demand that people work in those languages. And that work is very it's a long-term collective thing that we must do that. So what I'm saying is that there is not enough demand for work in Indian languages. Nobody requires it. So when there is no demand in any institutional sense, it's very hard to develop languages. Anyway, I'm happy to talk more about this because language is a subject that is close to my heart as well. I hear what you're saying. I hear your your sense of disappointment when these students are thwarted or blocked by English. About the development of elites, it's a problem everywhere, and higher education is one of the havens for the elite, right? It is as various sociologists from Bourdieu down have said, it's one of the ways of maintaining elites. Higher education is the central way in which elite cliques and elite groups maintain themselves. It's a way of producing distinction. So because we are aware of it, we can and it is a very a delicate thing, in the sense that if you want to make that elitism aware to available to those who have been excluded so far, you must do it without destroying the institution. That is the dilemma, that there must be institution capture without institutional destruction, and that is not very easy to achieve. So these are my very incomplete, very preliminary responses. There's a question here by Dr. Ray. Value-added courses. Isn't this the same as self-financing, what we talked about earlier, where you ask students to pay fees and sell this? So if so, then my answer is the same. Generating revenues, yes. So I would say the same thing. I agree that students and those involved with higher education should be made accountable in some sense, and so on. But usually the recourse to self-financing is of a different kind and needs to be thought about carefully. There's Tanya Sen has a question. Social capital prominence in public government institutions in such a trend. See, things are very uneven. This question, as I hope all of you can see, there's a question in the chat box by Tanya Sen, asking about the dominance of or the presence of relevance of social capital, prominence of social capital. What I meant by this was that when degrees become more generally distributed, that is to say, when more and more people have at least generically the same degree, like a BA degree or a BSc degree, an MA degree or an MSc degree, and so on, then the elite have to find, the established groups have to find some way of maintaining that distinction. So they begin to make distinctions based on things that have not yet entered the market. So if I can get a degree by entering a market, then the English language is an excellent example. English was a marker of elitism. So there is a huge industry for teaching English across the country. This is one of our best distributed industries. Every city you go to, you will see billboards saying learn English in 2 weeks or whatever it is that they have, various kinds of. When English becomes available, pure knowledge of the language, I mean knowledge in a basic sense, becomes available to all, markers of distinction will shift to the kind of English you speak. They will shift to your accent. They will shift to, so every time the market follows, right? So then there will be now coaching institutes to teach you how to speak English with the right accent. Then when that becomes available in the market, markers of distinction will move again to something else that is not in the market. So this is, Pierre Bourdieu has outlined this procedure very well, this process very well of the shifting of distinction. And this is what social capital tries to do. I'm afraid I don't have any. This is an area where it is very hard to generate hard evidence, so to speak. So I have only impressionistic from what I hear from around me, and I hear that it is, including in our most elite institutions, that its role is now increasing. That is what I hear. But this is, as I said, this is hearsay. It is not really based on anything that I can quote as a academic reference. There are other hands raised, I think.
Yes, Professor Mohanty, kindly. Yeah.
Sir, actually, I keep following your writings and your views on this, but I have a very generic concern. And let us think what we are for. Actually, for a democratic country and welfare state, it is expected that critical views and policy drawbacks are listened to and acted upon, especially when we are talking about HE. By HE, I don't mean small h, small e. I mean higher education, as we were talking about. So, in this context, I have three very related questions. It can be one. How do you look at this issue in the future of higher education in the country? Whose voice matters? And how can we really bring semblance between, as you have rightly said, the semblance between what is to be done out of what is said? Thank you.
Professor Mohanty has asked one of those, what in Hindi is called Guru Gambhir questions. Very serious, weighty questions. Whose voice matters? Well, at one level, all of us are aware of whose voice matters, the kind of people whose voice matters. But I think taking it in the spirit in which Professor Mohanty is asking, this is one of the things I am also personally concerned about, because the current phase we are in is remarkable for the degree of alienation between the academic intellectual sphere and the sphere of power or governance. Now it is traditionally considered to be the job of intellectuals and academics to be critical, and at the same time we all know that we are dependent on the state, particularly in public institutions. So this compromise is worked out in different ways, and capitalist democracy is the name of that compromise in a larger sense. So there are certain norms worked out in a particular political social context. Today we have crossed the limit of our old limits of the parameters that define the relationship between the state and academy. And we are on new territory, and I myself don't know what the future holds. But you are very right. I did not want to mention this because it is difficult to talk about in a concrete manner, but it is definitely one of the major issues of concern today. So on the one hand, intellectuals and academics don't realize how dependent they are on the state, even when they are, how dependent they are on the state, even when they are being very critical of it. Uh, on the other hand, I don't think we have had a government in recent times that is so unconcerned about the opinions of the academics or intellectuals, except of course its own supporters. So we have to see where normally it is hoped that when governments become confident that they are therefore more open, but that does not necessarily follow. Across the world, we have been seeing now, especially recently, last 10-15 years, we have been seeing evidence of the opposite. So you're asking a very, very important question to which I don't have an answer. I can only say that I share your concern that this is important. But so this does not mean that it has to be a cozy club where governance and intellectuals are saying the same thing, praising each other. You scratch my back, I scratch your back, type of thing. No, that's not what I mean. But there has to be some. It's like the relationship between the judiciary and the executive. There is supposed to be separation of powers. There are limitations. We can speak from within our university space and not in the space outside. But that should be taken in the right spirit. And it's a question of when we can regain some balance here. Because right now, I think it is outside what we have been used to so far.
Okay. Yes, we will take two more questions. One is Divya Lakshmi has raised her hand, and another one, Thomas. Thomas has written in the chat box. So, Divya, are you from St. Joseph's College, Ukhrul?
Sir, I am from Delhi School of Economics.
Divya, oh yes, our MA student. Yeah. Oh, okay. Please take your time. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Sir, I have one question about the recent proposal on bringing foreign universities in India. Does it might lead to further heighten the differences of privileged and marginalized in India? Because mostly in Indian scenario, reputation blinds the quality of an existing institutions in the market. If foreign universities comes up in the better market situation like now, India runs towards the foreign university and localized knowledges can go unnoticeable and it might lead to further new consequences. What's your take on this particular proposal? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah. I think one should be careful about making the equation between indigenous knowledge or local knowledge and its relationship to local or foreign institutions. It's in the field of sociology, anthropology, and what was once called Indology, much of the best work on Indian history and institutions and so on was done by foreign scholars. So just because the passport of a scholar does not determine how good a scholar that person is when he's studying this or that object. That said, your concern is a very valid one because institutions are embedded in a particular governance structure, in a particular society, and therefore it matters when foreign institutions come into India. I'm less concerned about the question of foreign institutions coming to India and more concerned about the differential conditions that are being created for foreign institutions and Indian institutions. If all institutions are treated the same by UGC or whatever regulatory authority the state chooses to employ, that is one thing. But this policy explicitly treats foreign universities differently. And that is my problem. The other problem, of course, is that the manner in which this has been worked out, I don't see a future for it. Because if major brands, if the top level universities wanted to do this, they could have done this a long time ago. Why don't we have 20 or 30 branches of Princeton University in all the countries that have allowed profit repatriation all the time, long before India? Right? They don't want to dilute their brand value. So they will not have, you will not have 20 Princetons here and there, or 30 Oxfords across the world. So what will be worked out will be some kind of a business sort of thing, which will make money. It will make money by trading on the foreignness of a degree and so on. And on the whole, I don't think much good will come of it. But my main concern really is the explicitly unequal treatment of Indian institutions and foreign ones. That I don't think, that is asking for trouble. There is a question here from Srikant. How can we address the issue of hierarchy among higher education institutions in India? This is not only an Indian problem, it's a problem across the world. On the one hand, you can say that higher education itself is a naturally elite field, in the sense that it requires prior qualifications before you enter it. It is not a fundamental right, in the sense that you have a right to livelihood, you have a right to various things that for which you don't need any qualifications. Just being a citizen, being a human being is enough. Here you need explicit qualification. You need to have cleared school to get into MA. You need to have done a BA and so on. So this makes room for elitism. We have to distinguish between intellectual elitism and social elitism. Intellectual elitism is, on the whole, a good thing. Being proud that your institution is intellectually better than another institution is not a bad thing. And that kind of competition among institutions, and in fact among scholars and amongst academics, is a good thing. But when this is about social elitism, that my being in this institution is like being in this caste or that caste, I'm upper caste because I'm in this institution. Now that is what has to be fought. And this is what I was talking about earlier as well. How do you fight this? Because the premium attached to that institution is valuable. You want to retain that premium. But you want that premium to be more widely available to a wider range of people. So you want to make elite institutions accessible to the non-elite without destroying those institutions. That's the challenge. How do you do that? Because the elite will resist it, obviously. So I don't think we can completely do away with hierarchies. I mean, in realistic terms, I'm not talking in terms of ideals. But we need more practical, more honest ways of dealing with the hierarchies that do exist, by making a distinction between acceptable and productive forms of elitism, that is to say intellectual elitism, the drive for excellence, as we say, as different, and fight against their being mixed up with social elitism, where you want to claim that you are this tribe or that caste or this group, and therefore you are better by birth. You are better by birth or by virtue of belonging to this group. So that's my initial response. But this is a very very important and long run problem.
Yeah, so there is one in the chat box, Thomas Kovum Katail, who asks, is NEP in any way going to help the betterment of higher education in India? So
this is see, there is something about policy documents of this kind. These are vision documents. They're not even actually policy documents. They are broader than that. They are vision documents. Vision documents, by definition, are meant to be general and vague. and they are meant to cover a very broad, and they are basically, and I'm not saying this in any pejorative sense, they are a set of good intentions, right? So vision documents are about good intentions. Now, especially in the last 15 or so years, both sometimes in the Congress regime and also in the current regime, we have seen that policy documents can say one thing and the actual thing, what is done on the ground, can be completely different. So this is a difficulty with analyzing or responding to policy documents because they may or may not be related to what will actually happen. So that is why I pointed out only things like lack of financial commitment in the document, which is very important in a government document. I also think if it is followed and implemented, the stress on holistic and multidisciplinary education is a good thing. I think rationalizing institutions to make them to make better use of resources is a good thing. Now, what will actually happen? We are not quite certain. At the moment, the NEP allows a very wide range of actual things, actual policy reforms or changes to be claimed to be under the NEP. You can now claim almost anything that you want to do, you can claim is covered by the NEP. So we have to wait and see the actual implementation, what route that will take. So NEP has good sides and it has not so good sides. What matters is what will actually happen.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Deshpande, for enriching us. I think you have given us to reflect on so many crucial themes and issues. So thank you so much. And there was one, which I could see, St. Joseph's College classroom setting. So I was trying to pin on that picture. I don't know whether people have seen or not. So there was this classroom setting, which I thought Professor Deshpande would love to see that setting as well. So we definitely will conclude now to propose the vote of thanks. May I request Professor Rekha from NEHU to please do the honors. Professor.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Kamei. On behalf of the Northeast India Sociological Association, NEISA, it is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks for the second edition of the lecture series held today, the 21st of January 2023, on the near future of Indian higher education. Well, on a lighter note, I have been given the last job of the day, but I still take this as definitely not the least because I think until and unless we thank one another, this program would be incomplete. So let me take this opportunity, first of all, to offer our deepest sense of gratitude to our honorable speaker for today's lecture, Professor Satish Deshpande, sir, from Delhi School of Economics, Delhi University, who has kindly consented to deliver the talk today. Indeed, sir. We are deeply honored for accepting our request to deliver this lecture, and I'm very sure the deliberation that you presented today has been a very, very fruitful one for all of us. We also thank our chairperson for today's lecture, Dr. Kamei Apun, for chairing the session. We thank Professor Rajendra Kshetri for proposing the welcome address, and thanks also goes to Professor M. Amarjit for the introductory address. Our program today would not have seen the light of the day if not for the tireless effort and enthusiasm of all the members of NEISA, the names of whom I cannot mention, of course, considering the fact that we are still a very, very young association. We are just about a year old. But I can see that our aims, objectives, our love for the discipline, the attachment to the profession we are in speaks volumes for the program that we are holding today. So we sincerely thank each and every member of the association for coming together on the same platform to work for the future and development of the discipline of sociology in the Northeast. So once again, thank you all for your participation. We also have so many participants today who may not be a part of NEISA, students, scholars, academicians. We thank all of you for being part of this lecture today and making it a success. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you all
Yes,
for
from
this opportunity.
yes, from St. Joseph's College. Please, can you come back and introduce yourself?
Yeah, Chandu, please stop the recording. I could see those
Yes.
students from Ukrul.
Yeah. So yeah, can you please introduce
Unmute
yourself and which class is this? I know the weather must be very, very cold out there. So if you can say some few words.
Please unmute yourself.
Yes.
She has come to
We
IS.
are students belonging to first year and final year. We are not able to put all together here. This.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
More.
Thank you. Special thanks to your students and bringing in this classroom setting. Yes. The last words. The Northeast India Sociological Association recognizes and value the true contribution of Professor Satish Deshpande to the ideas of India higher education and also on many crucial and critical themes of Indian sociology as well as general sociology. Once again, we thank you for delivering this beautiful, enriching, enlightening second special lecture. Thanks to the participants and also the organizers and to all the audiences. So have a great day and Happy New Year to all of you once again. With this, we conclude our second
Thank you all.
lecture series.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. We should
Professor
carry on.
Professor Deshpande has a flight to catch. So
yes,
I hope it is not very late. So
I just wanted to say that I look forward to learning from you about higher education in the Northeast.
So can I comment two things? One is that right now